Welcome to America's Healer with Dr. Jason West. Dr. West and his guest experts are about to open your eyes to a whole new perspective on the medical world. Now, here is your host, world-renowned Dr. Jason West.
Okay, everyone, welcome to America's Healer with Dr. Jason West. In the studio, we have a very special guest and a good friend of mine named Rebecca, who's going to give us some insight about the riding shotgun on cancer and health and how to eat healthy. It's just a real treat for us. So I'm excited that she's here with us and can give us some first-sight insight not only to our own health, but also what it's like when you have a family member that's diagnosed with something serious. We also wanted to give a shout out to our sponsors, the West Clinic, of course, where I work. We're in this wonderful little railroad town in Pocatello, Idaho. We have patients coming from all over the world to our office, and we absolutely love to serve them. A big shout out to my team there, and also a sponsor, Personalized NX. This is our supplement line that we know and trust and have custom formulated, and we're excited to have them as a sponsor. And then the last thing, you guys, we talked about this in depth last week, but even more this week, we have a special offer for our listeners at our website, americashealer.com. I'm so excited to share with you information there. There is a wonderful assessment and evaluation that you can do looking at your health and being able to customize a specific protocol specifically for you. There's no charge to do the evaluation. And of course, when you're there, you get our book, Why We Get Sick and What to Do About That. That is all on americashealer.com. So when people get sick, we're always looking for a pathway to get better. And one of the things that happens is we have several different delivery systems. We have mind-body healing, we have traditional medicine, allopathic medicine kind of combined, we have complementary, alternative, integrative, functional. There's all these different pathways that we can do to help people to literally achieve and maintain optimal health. And I have learned so many things from people that are in the trenches that have been diagnosed with something, and then they go and they research it, and then they come back and it's not intentional, but they are teaching me. And so one of my teachers that I'm excited to introduce you to is Rebecca. Rebecca started as a business advisor consultant for some web page stuff that we were trying to do, and that's how we met, and then we started talking, and she's been out to Idaho a couple times, and then she told me about a book that you wrote. So, Rebecca, to start us off, give everybody a little bit of feeling of how you started a health journey and how did you end up writing a book. Like, it's just fascinating to me.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, and thanks for the invitation to be on the show. I'm very excited. And as a side note on books, the Why We Get Sick and What to Do About It is a great book. So I really enjoyed that book. Definitely, for those of you who are listening, go and get a copy of that. But so 8 years ago, my husband was diagnosed with cancer, and their words just don't describe when you're sitting there across the table from your doctor and he says, "I'm sorry to tell you this, but you have cancer." And the first thing that goes through your mind is, oh my gosh, now what do we do? Your life flashes before your eyes, and as his wife, of course, then, they say, and my husband even said, it's probably harder for the caregiver and the loved ones than it is for the person going through the battle itself, because you're taking care of them and your family and your future and everything that goes along with that. So we went through that whole process of his diagnosis and helping him to heal. And we, at that time, went the traditional route. That's all we really knew that there was available. Mm-hmm. And it was interesting because we were at one of the largest cancer hospitals in the world, and I was so excited because I've always been interested in health, and was excited to get to talk to the dietitian there, because it's like, okay, here's someone who is trained in cancer therapy and cancer recovery, and the dietitian came in the room and said, well, he can eat whatever he wants as long as it falls within this soft food, post-surgery regimen kind of thing. And it was like, there's got to be something better.
Well, it's so fascinating because if you want to know, and this is not a dig on nutritionists and dietitians, but
Definitely
sometimes they get caught up in calories in, calories out, and nutritional exchanges. And I've told people, if you want to kind of know what traditional nutrition or dietitians is like, you get on an airplane or you go to the hospital.
Right.
Right? And that's not always known as the most gourmet type foods. And I know that there is some wonderful dietitians out there. I've met some of them that have really said, look, we learned how to count calories. We learned how to look at, the protein composition and the different types of food combining in school, but then they have really added a lot to this. But your experience is not surprising.
Yes, it was disappointing to say the least, but it was one of those things where I grew up on a farm and was very blessed that in my upbringing, we raised a lot of our own food. There was a lot of the gardening and fresh fruits and vegetables and all those kind of things. So I was kind of raised on that anyway. So you have that natural inclination to go towards the way you were raised. But what I did then is I went deep into researching. I actually went to Scripture personally, because we're a very spiritual family, and I went to Scripture to look for what are the best guidelines there on how to get your body healthy, and that's where the book came about. Was looking at how to support the body in healing. What was interesting is I studied the science behind what Scripture said and found some really interesting things, like, food combining and wheat. Big example there is that, the wheat of ancient times is not the wheat of modern times.
It's significantly different.
Not even the same structures. Like the ancient wheat was 14 chromosomes, modern wheat is 46 chromosomes, I believe. If I remember correctly. So it was like, well, it's no wonder then that we have so many people that have gluten intolerance and problems with consuming wheat. It's not even the same food.
Right. And so when they say in the scriptures, wheat is the staff of life and some other things, I'm not saying that the scriptures are outdated, but that was, again, 14 chromosomes versus 46 chromosomes, and they didn't have the food engineering where we're mixing wheat with goat grass to make it so that you don't need as much water, and that's where we get gluten sensitivity. Like, all of that wasn't in biblical wheat.
Exactly. But the interesting thing, you can still buy biblical wheat. It's available on the market. It's called einkorn. It's ancient wheat, EINKORN. And what's interesting is, like, even for me, my husband, and our family, when we switched to einkorn, you don't get the inflammation, you don't get that, digestive upset, all of those kind of things that come along with wheat. So that's just one of many examples of how food has changed over the years and how much that makes a difference when you're trying to support a chronic problem.
Do you notice a difference in taste?
Actually, I think it tastes better.
Okay.
It's a richer, deeper flavor. It's wheat. It still tastes like wheat, but it's just like nuttier, and it's much more filling.
Okay.
Like you can have a sandwich and you can easily sometimes have 2 or 3, or French toast in the morning, and you have several because your body's still saying I'm hungry because it's not getting nutrients. And interestingly enough, your modern wheat or ancient wheat, especially if it's sprouted and sourdough, it's incredibly higher in protein, as opposed to, you think of wheat as being carbs, and actually older wheat is more heavy in proteins and has healthy fats in it. So it's a really neat superfood.
Do you treat it just like normal wheat, like you're making bread?
Yeah, you can substitute with recipes.
Okay.
It absorbs liquids a little bit differently, so sometimes you have to adjust your liquids, but most of the time I've been able to just substitute 1-to-1.
Now, do you need to grind that on your own, or can you get it as flour?
I buy it as flour.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so you meet with the nutritionist, and you say, my husband has this serious diagnosis, and your belief system growing up on a farm, you are what you eat, you are what you absorb. I can't wait to meet with the specialist, and the specialist kind of says, we'll eat whatever, as long as it's soft. I mean, I don't know if she exactly said that, but that's kind of what my take is, that you can eat. And then what pathway does that lead you on?
Yeah, so that was when I dove deep into researching and came up with the chapters of the book and started really going deep on living foods. So one of the first things that you look at is look at your plate when you're whether it's breakfast, lunch, or dinner. How much of your food is living, that's giving you life? Because we're made up of energy.
Right.
Our cells are energy. And so if we're eating dead food, it's no wonder then that our cells aren't getting the nutrients in that we're sick. But if you're eating life, now we're eating that energy, we're consuming life, and then it allows the body to heal.
And I say something similar to patients all the time, of that you want to eat food close to the ground. And I always explain people, like, you pull out a carrot out of the ground, you know, wash it off, you eat it, that's really good for you. You take a carrot and you turn it into carrot cake, it's not so good for you. You know, it's away from the ground too much. So I love the idea of living foods, because if you eat living foods, you are alive. If you eat pre-digested, prefabricated, synthetic, you know, stuff like that, it's a chemical, and unfortunately some of those chemical foods taste really good, but they're not good for you.
Oh, sure. Sugar, salt, chemicals, all those things that they put in there to make them taste good.
Exactly. So you start on this pathway. Your husband's getting treated. You don't finish the book when you're in the treatment, but you start researching the book. So how long did the book come out after your experience with the nutritionist?
Took about 2 years, because I did quite a bit of research. And that was implementing a lot of what I learned into our lifestyle, talking to several doctors, several specialists, talked to you. Had a lot of different things that came up, and they had given him a very small percentage, because it's such a the type of cancer he had was very rare. And that's another thing too. If you're diagnosed with cancer, it really bothers me when doctors say, oh, you have 6 months, or you have 9 months, or get your affairs together. That really bothers me, because they don't have a crystal ball. They don't know. But it puts that in your head. And when my mom was diagnosed with cancer, they told her she had 6 months, and she passed away almost exactly 6 months from the time. Now, does that mean that the doctor really knew, or does that mean that he put that in her head and she just accepted that? So you know, if you're a loved one or you're facing with a major diagnosis like that, first of all, your doctor doesn't always know everything, and they can't see into your future. So that was a really big thing too. So our doctors had given him a pretty low percentage, which it was encouraging. They were saying, oh yeah, you can survive this, but kind of thing. And then every time that we would go back for his follow-up appointments afterward, they were just like, wow, you're like you're the rare case. We don't understand what's going on. This is amazing, because he was doing so well, and he had such great numbers, and he was made it through the first year, and then the second year, and then the third year, and then by the 5th year they said, well, now we can, instead of MRIs every 6 months, we can go every year. So that was really encouraging, when, you know, it's like, okay, we just have to keep paying attention to the lifestyle.
And I love that lifestyle incorporated. I have another story of a patient, again, diagnosed with a really serious soft tissue thing, where I don't want to give away any privacy problems, but anyway, very, very serious. It was relatively uncommon. It was pretty rare. Got him to the group together. There was 20 of them, and he said to he being the doctor, said to him, we're going to do this experimental trial. But just so you guys know, like, because of the nature and everything of the cancer, there's probably some of you in this room that aren't going to be here in a year.
Wow.
And so the patient that I started working with him said, okay, I really need to get very health-minded outside of the office. And so that was, I'm going to make a commitment and have no soda, no sugar, no pre-processed, prefabricated synthetic foods. And then he came to me and I said, okay, we're going to do these vitamin fusion treatments, and we want to add some oxidative medicine, and we want to do heat deprivation therapy. And anyway, what happened was, at the end of the year, he was the only survivor.
Wow.
So if you do simple math, 1 out of 20 is 5% survival. And about a year later, the doctor said to him, we have a new group coming in with the same type of cancer that you have, and I want you to come in and give them a dose of hope. And the patient said to him, okay, well, if I come in there and do that, I'm going to tell them everything that I did. And that includes healthy diet, positive mental affirmations, prayer, meditation, breathing, good foods, vitamin C infusions, ozone therapy. And the doctor said, well, that stuff really doesn't matter. You just really responded really well to our clinical trial. And the patient said, well, I'm the only one still standing out of that. And so my takeaway from that, and I think that the doctor, what he was saying was, well, this is what I know and understand. This is how I would make an explanation of that. And the patient was saying, look, when we go into the infusion center, we had this great big candy area there where, because we didn't feel like eating, and they're like, oh, eat anything. So there was Skittles, and there was Starburst, and there was chocolate, and I'm making a huge thing of, I don't want to do that. So I'm really excited to hear more about this. You guys, we're getting ready to get into our break. This is America's Healer Show with Dr. Jason West, and I'm joined in my office, in my studio, with my friend, patient, advisor, and everything else, Rebecca. She was bride and shotgun for a cancer diagnosis, not on her, but for her significant other, which turns, like, I absolutely know my wife would be the same way. She would turn into a cancer researcher expert overnight. And then we heard about this rare case. Well, we hope you make it extended fast, our prognosis. And then it went 1 year, 2 years, 5 years. Okay, now we can get a little bit of breathing room. We're going to be coming back and talking about what it's like to ride shotgun with someone cancer, and then all of the things that Rebecca and her husband discover, all of the medical options. We're going to talk about surgery. We're going to talk about blood tests and workups, and then we're going to talk about considerations of having a home healing room. I'm excited to talk to you about that. I'm also excited to delve more into your book. So this is the Dr. Jason West Show, the America's Healer. Remember that you can go to the website and get our free book, Why We Get Sick and What to Do About It, as well as an evaluation at americashealer.com, and we'll pick you guys right after the break.
You're listening to America's Healer with Dr. Jason West. If you have a question for Dr. West or his guests, feel free to join us on the show at 866-472-5792. That's 866-472-5792. Now, back to the show.
All right, everybody, welcome back. This is the America's Healer program with Dr. Jason West, and we're so excited to have someone that's been right in the trenches for several different healthcare concerns. What happened during the workup, where their options were, including diet, including a home healing room that came a little bit later, and all of these different educational pieces I'm excited about. So Rebecca's in the studio with me. We're going to talk about her journey and her husband's journey. In the first segment, we wanted to give an overview of what it's like in that system to be diagnosed with a cancer diagnosis. And so again, it wasn't Rebecca, it was Rebecca's significant other. And then they started in this pathway, and then Rebecca discovered some foods and some old wheat with different chromosomes, and we mentioned that in the first segment. Also, we wanted to just remind people, we reference multiple times where you can get some additional resources at americashealer.com. We have an ebook over there called Why We Get Sick and What to Do About It, as well as a health evaluation that is free that helps us to really custom tailor some things for your health. So I'm going to come back and pick this up. Rebecca, we were talking about your journey, how you got in, discovered old wheat, how you eventually wrote a book, but we talked about your husband's diagnosis. And so kind of walk us back through what was his initial symptoms, and then you go to workup, then you give the diagnosis. Like, kind of walk us through that part.
Yeah, so in his case, he started having some pain down his left side, and it was kind of a concern. We were a little worried about things like stroke and heart attacks and, those kind of things. As soon as you have pain down your arm, it's always a big thing where it's like, okay, we need to pay attention to this.
For sure.
So that's where then we went in, it was diagnosed, and that was kind of the beginning of this whole journey. When you are diagnosed, that's always when immediately it's like, all right, now what do we do? And my husband is very much about traditional medicine. Let's look at that. His sister's a nurse, and she's been an amazing resource through this whole process. We were very blessed to have a nurse in the family, because I think that any time that you have a major diagnosis, it's helpful to have an advocate. And if you don't have one in your family, it's helpful to find one, because there's a lot of really great medical advocates out there, because you need people to kind of translate, to help get you through all of the ins and outs of what's going on. To be your sounding board, to interpret some of the things that are going on. I know even in business and in things like that we do, we always say that you only retain about 20% of a presentation when you listen to one. And even more so when you're in talking to a doctor, because you're emotional, you are confused, you're overwhelmed, and
they have a different language
they
too.
really do. They really do. I mean, it's all these different terms that don't make any sense, and you're just wanting to know, just tell me what I need to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I jokingly tell people it doesn't matter the initials after your name. They take you into this room to make sure that, if your doctor, before they give your diploma, and of course it's a joke, that you have bad handwriting, and then you promise to use the biggest words as possible. And so matter of fact, a great story that I have about that is a patient had a suspected, problem in her spine. They got an x-ray, and in the x-ray report, the doctor said under the impressions, unremarkable. And the patient was like, I can't believe that he would say that about me. Unremarkable, like I have personality plus. And I said to her, no, this is the terminology that says there's nothing to see. Like, this is a good term. It has nothing to do with you or your personality. It's that there's nothing to talk about.
Nothing medical.
Nothing medical. And okay, well now I've been mad at that doctor for months. So, but there is that language where they, we describe everything, in anatomical terms and Latin language, and we use a lot of, abbreviations and acronyms and everything else, and seemingly without meaningful. I mean, we do it in our office, and we make a conscious effort not to do it, and we're still doing, we need to do, anyway, there's a bunch of different terms over there. So you're lucky you have a sister-in-law that's a nurse, that's your advocate, that's help explaining things. And so you go into the workup, and the doctor says, we found something, and what happens?
Yeah, so in our case, they recommended surgery and proton radiation. He wasn't a chemo candidate. It's always nice to explore all the options. That's where recently his cancer has returned. It's been 8 years, and so that's why we're here seeing Dr. Jason, because back when he was diagnosed the first time, we didn't have access to the resources that we do here, which is amazing. So it's so encouraging to be able to take it from a two-pronged approach this time, where we're getting the treatments that you recommend, as well as looking at the traditional approach. It's like coming at it from both sides. So that really makes a big difference, I believe, is that when you have options, to be able to explore all those options and attack it. Like I even say, as my husband's caregiver support, I'm a warrior standing next to him to be able to protect him in battle, because he's going through battle. He's figuring mentally, physically, spiritually, everything. He's walking into battle, and that's my job as his spouse, his support, to be that warrior standing next to him.
For sure. And what a blessing that he has. Just looking at that pathway. So you go around, you get the initial thing. He's got some left-sided symptoms. You rule out stroke. They discover a space-occupying lesion. We're going to do this specific therapy, and you think you got it. Like 5 years, you're like, oh great, we're home free. Like we've got it. And then what happens the second go around?
Second go around, I think, hit a little harder than the first one. So the first one was a shock, and it's like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? The second time was like, okay, we survived the first one, but now we know what to expect, because it's kind of like, okay, we've been through it once before. It's almost sometimes harder, because now it's like, okay, well, we beat it once. What are the odds that we can do it again? But it's also then just, again, we actually, in some ways it's harder, but in some ways it's easier, because we've been through it before, but also because we're so much smarter.
Right.
Because I've done the research. I have more resources. We know more people. We're older and wiser, so to speak.
Right. So you start your husband down the pathway. You're two warriors. One warrior with the diagnosis, one warrior as the support structure, and you're looking at things of saying, okay, we're going to do, what we've been doing, which is eating food close to the ground, natural, alive foods, and we're adding. And I think that you had this on the first go around, but I want people to hear it again. you've always been really faith-based. Like you've had, you have a connection, and you do your worship and your prayer and your meditation, and that's a component.
It is. It's the mind spiritual component. It's also the balance. It's finding balance in your whole life, in every area of your life.
And I tell people when we do our workups, it's so important to believe in something. Matter of fact, one of the roughest patient outcomes that I have is I had a patient that came from back east, over 2,000 miles to the office, and she came in and she had a very serious diagnosis, an autoimmune. It was not cancer, and when I went in to do the workup, we went through the get to know you questions, then we go through the medical questions, and I said to her, okay, so tell me about why are you here? Like, what are your expectations? And she said, look, I don't believe in God. I don't believe that there's a purpose. I don't believe that you can help me. I don't believe. And I said, well, I need to know why you're here. And she said, well, because I've heard from, my aunt's cousin that they had a really good experience here, and I thought I'd give a shot, but there's nothing that you're going to be able to do for me. You're my 27th doctor.
Oh my.
And I said to her, well, this is going to be a pretty short process because I think you need to go home. And she said, what do you mean? What are you going to do? And I said, well, if you don't have a starting belief system, I don't really have things to help you. And it's not because you have to believe in what I do. I have a lot of people that come that are out of hope and out of options, and they're cautiously skeptic. I'm like, you don't have to believe that. But I do want you to believe in something that we can build on. And so I love the fact that the mind-body component, the spiritual component, the faith component has been a factor. And so tell me about, you do the traditional treatments, which was surgery and proton beam radiation. Mm-hmm. And then you go through it the first time with your husband, and we're like, hey, we're going to put you back together, and that is the healthy foods, and you kind of developed a little bit of a medical room that I'm excited for you to share people about. But also, in between the first time and the second time, you're doing research, and what do you discover?
Yeah, I discovered so many things. Like, I was on an airplane with a guy, because I travel, and the guy sitting next to me was like in his 80s, but he looked like he was in his 50s. And so it's like, tell me what's your secret? Mm-hmm. I mean, seriously, and he chatted a little bit with me, but he said, okay, I'm going to tell it to you in one simple sentence. Make health your hobby. So he said, think about it. Your hobbies are something you do for fun. You look forward to doing them. You have a different mindset about them. And if you have health as your hobby, then it's not a chore. It's not, I have to change my lifestyle. Mm-hmm. It's something you do because it improves your life.
Absolutely. I love it. So he gave you that advice. Did he give you any other nuggets?
There were a couple things he talked about, of course, the make sure it's living foods that we talked about. He said, eat the rainbow. Right. That's a big thing when we come with foods. It's, and this is the part I personally struggle with the most. It's relaxing, controlling your stress, because stress is always the biggest challenge. And then especially as a caregiver, that becomes one of the hardest things, because all of the responsibilities and the what ifs, and stress by definition is a sense of lack of control. And what is cancer but something that you just really don't feel like you have any control over? So those are some of the things that I continue to work on, both in myself and trying to support my husband, is of course control the stress.
What about any other things? Do you learn about, where did you start learning about vitamin C and oxidative medicines and ultraviolet therapy? Was that through our association, or did you discover some of that before?
Most of that started with you. The ozone therapy was from you. The vitamin C therapy definitely with you, and that's where I like you were talking about earlier. We created a health room in the house. So essentially, right. We took an old, what used to be my son's room when he moved out, went to college. We turned that into what I fondly started calling my spa room, mm-hmm. And then we moved it into a health room. So essentially, it's got the ozone therapy, red light therapy. We have the foot detox therapy. There's a sauna. And what's crazy is a lot of times you don't have to spend an arm and a leg. It's like I have so many friends that say, well, I just can't afford to do all of that. And you'd be surprised at how a lot of these therapies really aren't that expensive. And it's so handy to be able to have a place to go so that you have a room that becomes this shut it off kind of place. It's like from a mindset perspective even. That's why even when you talk about studying, if you have a place to study, it's easier to remember and to score better on your test because it sets you in a certain mindset.
Yeah, it's the study room, it's the relaxation room. For me, just personally, I found that if I go to a specific place with a specific ritual to write, which right over to our, your right and my left is my writing space. Like I know if I go there, I'm going to write.
Yeah.
And it's so much easier than trying to recreate that environment, on the road or at home or in an easy chair with my laptop or something like that. Like I'll try, but it's just not the same.
Yeah. Life is fast enough as it is. We need to have places that helps our brain to reset.
Okay, so the second time around, he starts having some similar symptoms, or at least I think some that you had from the first go around. You do the workup, and right now I like it because you're kind of taking the best of both worlds.
Yes.
And we're going to be like, hey, we just want to get his body as healthy as possible for an upcoming surgery. We want to take advantage of the electron donation from vitamin C. We want to increase the oxygen capacity using oxygen ozone. We want to use all of the things to balance out his blood tests and getting his minerals and stuff put together. And so he decided to make a journey from the show me state to the gem state.
Yes.
So walk us through a little bit of the decision to travel, 1,800 miles to the little railroad town and how we got that arranged.
Yeah, absolutely. So when he was diagnosed the second time, you were one of the first people that I called.
I remember because I thought when you said, hey, we had our group meeting, and then you said, hey, I need to talk to you. And I thought, oh no, she's going to fire me as a client.
Oh no.
That's what I thought. You're like, I need to talk to you in private. And I'm like, oh man, what am I going to do with all of this, online website classes and everything? But it wasn't what I was expecting at all.
So you actually felt relieved when I did.
Well, I wasn't relieved because obviously you're special to me. So I was like, oh no, like I don't want that to happen. And a little tiny part of me was like, oh, okay. She's not, she's not punting me. She's not firing me. It's something that is really significant. And then when you told me about it, immediately my focus was, oh, okay, so let me bring to bear everything that I know so that we have the best possible medical outcome. It's not an either or thing. And this is what I tell people all the time when they're wanting to know, what do I do if I've been diagnosed with this type of malignancy? And unfortunately, it kind of goes back to the old roots of politics in medicine, where you don't, like a lot of doctors are like, well, we don't combine things. Like, you can't do vitamin treatments with chemotherapy. And I know that your husband's case is not chemotherapy, but some oncologists and cancer specialists are very open-minded and some are very closed-minded. So a lot of it is luck of the draw with the patient's doctor. I have a medical doctor 50 miles away that says, hey, whatever you can do to balance your body, like I'm totally for it. I have another one that says, if you do anything outside of what I prescribe, then I won't allow you to be a patient. So
Wow.
we wanted to look at things. I showed you some studies and some other things, and then you make the pilgrimage out here and just kind of tell people what your first workup was like, what we do different versus traditional medicine workup. I'm excited to hear what you're going to say about this.
Oh, it's amazing. It is so cool because what I love what you do is you put the blood on a microscope and then show us where it's on a big screen right next to you, and then you describe what you're seeing. And it's really neat because it's, instead of it just being tests and a bunch of documents and reports, I mean, this is his blood, and his blood cells were on the big screen in front of us, and we could see exactly what we were up against and what were some of our options, and you walked us through that. It was, in his case, it was actually encouraging because his blood looked pretty good.
It did. It looked surprisingly good. I was happy to see that it didn't have some of those common malignancy characteristics.
Yeah, which is interesting because I've never experienced that before. with any other doctor is where they look at your blood and then break it down from what you're seeing in the bloodstream.
Yeah, I wish more doctors did it. Unfortunately, there's some politics associated with that evaluation. Of course, it's a research project that we're doing in the office, and then we want to be careful not to mismanage patient expectations. So one of the things that I always do in the workup is to ask people, why would you come to the little railroad town? I love asking this question. And then what does it mean? And so we put it together. And then what was fascinating is I always get to tell people, look, you have your, expectations. And people a lot of times have guarded expectations because they don't want to get hopes up and then have them, dashed.
Sure, of
or
course.
But I always like to tell people, well, here's what I think. And we're getting ready. We have 1 minute to go to the break, so I got to tell one quick story, and then we're going to come back, and we have another full segment we're going to do. But one of the things I was really excited to share with you on Monday morning is I have another patient that had a really serious, rare condition that was told, you need to get all your affairs in order. And she came, we started on the treatments, we started on the peptides, the vitamin C, and we started doing all of that. And she had texted me that morning and said, the doctors are shocked that it's decreased so much. Now she's doing a combination therapy just like you, of the best of both worlds, but they said this has far exceeded our expectations. And what was fun to hear about that story is she said they told her, whatever you're doing, keep doing it.
Wonderful.
So you guys, America's Healer with Dr. Jason West in studio with Rebecca. We're going to break. We're going to come back. You got to stay with us for the final segment of how to be healthy and what you can do for prevention and co-treatment and a whole bunch of other things. I'll see you guys right after the break.
You're listening to America's Healer with Dr. Jason West. If you have a question for Dr. West or his guests, feel free to join us on the show at 866-472-5792. That's 866-472-5792. Now, back to the show.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to America's Healer with Dr. Jason West. We are coming at you from a little railroad town in Pocatello, Idaho. I love this little place. It's 107 years ago, my great-grandfather started a clinic and wanted to make a difference for people all over the world. And we had people coming in on the railroad, and then we had people coming in on covered wagons, and then we started to have, obviously, the world catches up with us, globalization occurs, and now we have people coming from all over. And one of the questions or the statements that bothers me, and why I decided to do a platform like this in a radio show, is so many times people would say, I wish I would have found you or a doctor like you before or when I was getting diagnosed or when I was having my treatments and stuff like that. And so we decided to put together this platform. We have enormous resources for you available. It's at americashealer.com. And the resources include literally pretty much a summary of every show that we do called Why We Get Sick and What to Do About It. It's an ebook that we have, and we also have a wonderful evaluation that you can go through where I actually have a little video thing. I walk you through, hey, what are you having as far as symptoms and conditions? And we have some options to do some amazing custom formulation for helping us to get everything into a custom formula for you to take, which has all your vitamins and minerals and everything into it. And that evaluation, of course, is for free over on americashealer.com. I am joined in the studio by a friend, business advisor, health expert, and healthy living expert, Rebecca. And Rebecca has written a book, and I'm excited if anybody wants more information about old wheat and einkorn and everything. Tell us the name of your book.
It's called The Theologenic Diet, what the Bible says about diet, health, and nutrition, and you can find it at healthyhomesteadliving.com.
Awesome. And I actually have a book. I've gone through it, and I love the healthy eating component. I love all of the philosophy in it. And then our paths crossed a little bit to closer level because Rebecca's significant other got diagnosed with cancer 8 years ago. They went through the treatments. It was looking good. He reached the 5-year mark. They're basically saying, you're in remission. We don't need to do the scans quite as often as we were doing before. and then a secondary diagnosis. And so, Rebecca, that pathway, and you said some of the news was easier, some of it was harder. The second time around, you had more resources. You have your health room or your escape room. Luckily, that your son went to college, and you're like, oh, we have this extra room. Let's make it into this, health room. You didn't talk about salt, so I wanted you to mention just a little bit about salt, because that's always been intriguing to me. And then we're going to come back and we're going to talk more about that cancer pathway. But tell us about salt.
Okay. There's actually a whole chapter in my book about salt. So salt, of course, in our health room, we have the Himalayan salt lamps and those kind of things. But salt is one of those things that kind of gets a bad rap, where a lot of people are like, oh, if you have high blood pressure or things like that, you need to get off the salt. And the reality is, it's just what kind of salt that you're consuming. That the traditional table salt that everybody has, or that's found in all processed foods, is what's causing all the harm. But the reality is, we actually need salt. There's so much important minerals and components. It's balancing. It's good for the blood.
And I agree with that. Matter of fact, I think salt has got a bad rap for a long time. Of course, you can abuse it. And it's just like
just like anything else. Yeah.
Natural sugar, you've got to have. Too much synthetic sugar is really problematic. But, for a long time, they were saying, okay, too much salt causes high blood pressure, and it causes, glaucoma, and it's swelling and edema, and you shouldn't have salt. And it's kind of like the egg thing, don't eat eggs. Oh, eggs are good for you. Don't eat eggs. It's bad for cholesterol. And so in medicine, we have a tendency to flip decisions every decade or so. And so we have to have salt to run your sodium-potassium channel gates on your nerves and make sure your kidneys function and everything else. And yes, you can abuse synthetic iodized salt, but that's not really the salt you're talking about.
Right.
So what's the salt you're talking about?
So I'm talking about Celtic sea salt. Occasionally the Himalayan pink salt can be substituted if you can't find the Celtic sea salt. But actually the Celtic sea salt's going to be, or Celtic, I guess, depending on who's pronouncing it. It's like potato.
Right.
Of course, we're in Idaho, so I guess it depends.
Potato.
It's potato because you're in Idaho. But so that is high in minerals. It's balanced, just like anything. It's how your body absorbs and uses what you're consuming. So like you said, eggs, there's a big difference when you break it down molecularly between a store-bought egg from these caged chickens versus a farm fresh egg. Actually, the cholesterol levels are different. The way that it is absorbed into the body is different. It's the same thing with wheat, the same thing with dairy. So it really is about understanding your ingredients and knowing what it's actually doing in your body.
And there's some really nice medical effects, not necessarily from ingesting salt, but also being able to breathe salt.
Breathing salt, yes.
Yeah, so tell us about breathing salt.
Breathing salt is so powerful. So I ended up investing during COVID with in a halogenerator, which essentially is a unit that turns a pharmaceutical grade salt into vapor. So you breathe the salt. So it's kind of similar, like one of the reasons we love going on vacation on the beach is because you're breathing that fresh salt air. Mm-hmm. And you always seem to sleep better when you're on vacation at the beach, right? It's kind of like
right.
this incredible thing that salt does when you're breathing it. Well, salt is antiviral, antibacterial, antifungal. And so it's fantastic when it gets into your lungs. It helps with colds, it helps with allergies. But it's also really interesting on your skin because it helps with things like psoriasis and skin issues or fungal issues. So having this vaporized salt that you breathe and have exposed to your skin is incredibly therapeutic.
So it's not taking a salt dust or anything like that, and like the vaporizer puts it into basically, I'm assuming, kind of an ionic.
It's ionic form,
form of salt, and of course, so salt is. If you look at how the English sailors would sail around the world, is they would preserve things by packing them in salt because, obviously bacteria and fungus can't grow in that region. So when you told me about that, I've just been so incredibly fascinated with that. And a note to myself, I need to get a Halo salt generator for my office.
It's amazing.
So if I say it out loud, now someone's going to hold me accountable for that. And I'm like, yep, we are going to get a Halo Salt ion generator, because just as you were saying that, I'm like, I need that. I gotta
It's
have
such a
that.
powerful therapy. It really is.
So we, in this pathway, we're getting ready for a medical procedure where they're going to go in, and the type of cancer that he has is not in. It's really there's a surgical option, and then there is a radiation option later. And so one of the things that I was telling you about, I'm excited to get his body prepped. Like if we can preload his body with a bunch of vitamin C, and we can have minerals, and we can get all these oxygen pathways. My expectations of what's going to happen is he's going to heal up incredible. And so I was really excited about that. I also was excited to tell people about it's not just, I don't want to use names for privacy reasons, but there's so many people. One of them was on our program, on our live cast on our YouTube channel, so I can use his name, of Mud Murdoch, that had liver cancer, and it had spread to his kidneys, and they told him he couldn't function. We've got so many cases where people have used a combination of therapies to get better, and this is the other reason for the platform, is to remind people that if you can find doctors that don't care who gets the credit, because I don't care who gets the credit. I just want to help the patient. Like, so if the oncologist says, "Oh, we got all this with surgery, or with the proton therapy, or with the other patient with the chemo," great. But the outcome is what's so important. And there's doctors out there like that on both sides of the aisle. There's certainly doctors that say some interesting bedside manner things, and then there are ones that are true healers. And it's so fun to combine forces with doctors that just want to get people better. So, Rebecca, in this process, and maybe if it's too personal, then tell me, but when I've interviewed a lot of people over the last 23 years, and whether it's significant autoimmune, which can be terminal, and cancer that can be terminal, sometimes people recognize a blessing in the pathway, or with the diagnosis, either that helps mend the relationships or helps them to get to know themselves. And it's not, I'm not going to say it's a blessing that your significant other has cancer, but is there something that if someone is in this pathway, or they have a loved one, either a spouse, a parent, a child, that is having a pending diagnosis or has had the diagnosis, whether they're across the street or across the country, what would you tell them?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a couple things. One is, yes, even through this, it's been anything that we're faced with a challenge and a crisis, there's always blessings that are associated with it. I mean, we can be introspective and self-absorbed and look at it as, oh, this is happening to me. Or we can look at it from an approach of, this is something I'm facing, but it's a challenge that's going to give me a new perspective. And when we are faced with challenges, it helps us to help others who are also going through similar, because if you've never been through it, you can't fully, it's never the same for everybody, but you have a different perspective that other people who have not been through it have. And the second thing is, when you go through crisis, it is one of the best times to see the true beauty of humanity. I've seen some amazing people that I never would have expected, who have come forward and offered help in ways that I'm still, it brings me to tears. Because and to be humble enough to accept help from people who want to help, but also to just recognize that people really are good, and they want to help, and they want what's best for other people. And that we tend to live in our bubbles, and we tend to forget that. So that would be my two things that I would say to that, is just recognize that there's always blessings, and that people are amazing.
Yes, so Rebecca, that's like one of the best statements that I've heard, I think, because one of the things that is so good for everyone is recognizing, like, it's not just you fighting the battle, right? It's not just your husband. And also, it's fascinating what happens when, again, people step up and they want to help, and there's some relationship cohesion and stuff that occurs. My mom's really not doing very well right now, and part of it is age and the fact that she's been a widow for a long time, and she's kind of said, I've lived a really good life.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've seen in my family, I'm one of 6 siblings, is this opportunity for us to have closer relationships than we've had in a long time, with my mom being the common denominator. And of course, with that, it's again, I don't wish this diagnosis or experience on anyone.
Absolutely.
But I also recognize that I've had people that have been on death's door that have come back and later on say, that's the best thing that happened to me.
Mm-hmm.
That's the best opportunity or experience. And of course, not everybody says that. Part of it is the pathway, and part of it is the journey. And so with the time that we have left, which my producer just said we have a couple minutes left, if someone's listening, if there's, I know you told the lesson, but what would you advise them or suggest to them as a introduced medical researcher? So what I mean by that is no one is a medical researcher, or I shouldn't say no one, but people became significant advocates for themselves and their loved ones when they have a diagnosis for this. Is there any advice or suggestions that you would give to someone of how to be a medical researcher for a condition that they've been diagnosed with or their loved one's been diagnosed with?
Ooh, that's a good question. Yeah, it can really quickly get overwhelming because there's so much information out there, and a lot of the information is contradictory. So I would say if you're wanting to research whatever's going on for you or your loved one, is go to credible sources. Go to sources that, nothing against social media, but social media is not always correct. And we have so many different things that people will put out there that can confuse us even more, and that creates an even bigger stress, because remember we talked about stress as a lack of control and confusion, and when you're confused and frustrated and overwhelmed, that's when then you get that downward spiral.
So you guys, this has been the America's Healer radio program with Dr. Jason West. I've been delighted to share this hour with my guest, Rebecca, who has been through so many things as far as a business. That's how we connected, and then with her husband's initial diagnosis and then the secondary diagnosis, and turning into a medical researcher, a health advocate, getting her own health room with the Halo the salt and everything. If you need more information, pick us up on americashealer.com. We have a free ebook over there. This has been our program for the day. I'm so excited to share with you guys new programs and information every Friday at 1 o'clock. And for replays, you can pick us up, syndicated on the different platforms, and of course our link at our website and at americashealer.com. I'll see you guys next week.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode. America's Healer, Dr. Jason West, will be back next week to share more of his expertise, so don't miss it. Until then, have a great week.